have something to write on? Quick note? Okay. We are going to play a modified version of Two Truths and a Lie. Anybody know this game? Like, we did not come to play games. Sorry, no. Okay, on a piece of paper, this is what I want you to do. Take a minute, go through the historical records. What are two things you believed about your life when you were young? What are two things you believed about your life when you were young? Two beliefs you had, two things you expected life to be, you expected to happen. Two things. Okay. Anybody want to share a couple of things they believed life would be, they expected? Yeah? Okay, so Becky believed she'd get married and have children. Okay. Perfect children. Where do we get those? Where's the sign-up sheet? I stood at the wrong door asking for kids, I think. I got the wrong one. Anybody else want to share? Yeah? Yeah, I believed marriage would be forever, but it wasn't. Yeah. Anybody else want to share? Yeah? Oh, you thought you were going to live forever. Life seemed endless. It would go on forever. Anybody else think that one? Yeah. She believed nothing bad would ever happen to her. You're invincible. You're like 16. You know everything more than everybody else, and they're all messing it up. But when you just get out there in the wild, you're going to fix it. I hang out with these people. Anybody else got something to share? Yeah. Oh. Yeah, I used to believe that everybody loved as deeply as I do. Good one. Anybody else got one they want to share? So two truths and now the lie. What's a lie that you believed when you were young? It all made perfect sense back then. What's something you believed? Take a second to think about that one. Yeah. Santa Claus. Santa Claus. Yes. Shane has a funny story about that one. And unwrapping that one on a Sunday morning from the pulpit, and it happened to be Children's Sunday. You're gonna have to ask him sometime. It's precious. Anybody got another one? Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a good lie to believe, though. That's really beautiful. Oh, Susu, just like from It's a Wonderful Life. I love it. I love it. Sadly, no. Do you know how many rose petals I'd be plucking and throwing in my front yard if that worked? I'd be plucking them all. Anybody else got one that you want to share? Hey, babe, we're doing two truths and a lie. You were like the king of youth group. Don't play. Anybody else got one they want to share? Okay, so we just talked about two things that we believe to be true about our lives and one lie that we believed about our life. Okay, so this is the theme for our study, and we talked about it a little bit last week. The one thing that I hope that you can take away from this is that one of the great mistakes we make is the false belief that when we become a Christian, we welcome God into our life, and that's fundamentally backwards. If you can see life as the creator of the universe started this world, and he's continuing the story, and he invites us into his story, it's a completely different perspective shift. It no longer becomes, why am I struggling? Why am I suffering? Why is there such horrible, awful things in the world? Why did it happen to me, Lord? Why, God, why? When you can understand that we are not inviting God into our lives, because that assumes we're the center of the universe. And when we can understand that God has invited us into this creation story that he's telling, it can help give us some perspective that when you're reading a story, we're teaching our kids to read, right? The fourth grader is getting into novels. We're talking about, where's the conflict? You read a story, you know there will be a conflict. You know there will be a climax. You know there will be some kind of resolution. Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad, but you're not going to read a story unless something spicy happens. Like, that's just why we read novels, right? And we hope it ends well. But if we all walked into life here and just assumed it would all go well, we're going to be terribly, terribly disappointed. So what we're going to focus on is shifting that lens from, why is it happening to me? How do I endure the crisis? Because I offer you no great answers. In the book of Job, Job says the same thing. Why is this happening to me? Why, God, why? And the interesting and the telling thing about that is that at the end of the book, if anybody's read to the end of Job, did God ever give him an answer? No, never. Never did God explain the story. Job never got so much as the introduction that we got in the first couple of chapters of Job. We have the benefit of the first couple of chapters. Job didn't even get that. God says merely, this is my story and I'm writing it, and in a nutshell, stick with me, kid. You're going to have to trust me in the process.
So one of the things that we talk about in Job, and remember we're in the Lenten season. Did I say that right? Lenten? Okay. So one of the things we talk about is ashes. Why do we have Ash Wednesday? What is it symbolic of? In the book of Job, when he writes about Job, it's interesting that when his whole life has been torn apart, when everything is falling apart, what does he do when he's got weeping sores and boils and they are terribly, terribly painful? He takes a piece of pottery as he's sitting in the ash heap, and he begins to scratch the open sore wounds. One of the things about Ash Wednesday, traditionally that's been celebrated, is the phoenix. Anybody know what a phoenix is? What is it? It's a bird who dies and rises back from the ashes. That because of Jesus, we have hope that the ashes of our life, from dust to dust, from ashes to ashes, we will be recreated and we will come out of our death and come into life. We saw that on Sunday when my daughter was baptized. She was buried in death and she's risen to new life. Romans chapter 6. So we remember that Jesus died, that he rose again from ashes to ashes, from dust to dust. We will rise again because of Jesus Christ.
That actually segues me to the next part of this. And if we're thinking about it this way, if our life is a gift, and if God is inviting us into the story, and if Ephesians is true that he knew the plans that he had for us long ago, then what if instead of focusing on the story we want told about our lives, what if we can envision that the story is actually going to be unfolded for us when we get to heaven? So Shane talked about Walt Whitman and him going to look for his brother a couple of months ago. You don't even remember it. That's precious.
Yeah,
I remember your sermons, every one of them. You did. A couple of months ago, he was talking about, there was a guy named Walt Whitman. Anybody hear of this guy? Okay. Walt Whitman, he's known for many things about his life, but one of the more interesting stories is that he lived during the Civil War. He went to look for his brother in one of the army hospitals. He couldn't find him in one of them. He kept searching. He finally did find him. Thankfully, For Walt, his brother was not severely hurt, but he was so profoundly shaken by seeing the suffering and the anguish that these people were going through. He moved to Washington, D.C., where this hospital was, where he found his brother, and he continued to go to the hospitals and serve the wounded soldiers. And it profoundly changed his life. He goes on to write a book of prose and poetry, and you're just real excited about this? But...
I was just thinking about the old hymn.
Okay, what?
Stand up for Jesus. Thank you. Some of you.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I was just a little distracted by that. So he goes, and his life is profoundly changed by this. He writes a book, and in that is a poem or an essay, if you will, that's called O Mio Life. Anybody heard of it? It's somewhat famous if you are into poetry. Let me read it for you because, interestingly, though we don't have an account of his Christian life, it's after he sees this suffering and this tragedy in life, he reflects on what life really means. He says, "O me, O life, the questions of these recurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of the cities filled with the foolish, of myself forever reproaching myself, for who is more foolish than I, and who is more faithful?" And he goes on at the end and says, "Of the empty and useless years of the rest, with the rest me intertwined. So what is the answer of all these things? That you are here, that life exists, an identity, that the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse." This is particularly telling because as we're flipping through Ephesians, if you have it, flip to Ephesians chapter 2 with me. Or Ecclesiastes. Sorry, Ecclesiastes.
Who's having problems with their brain now?
Me. It's me. Ecclesiastes 2 is all about the futility of life. And I did pull this up in the NIV because most of you guys seem to have the NIV, okay? And I want you guys to be able to follow along. So Ecclesiastes 2 says, "I said to myself, come now, I will..." What? Are we good? We need a minute to find it? Okay. Yes, last week I had the NLT and I was looking on a blank crew of bewilderment, so I decided to just pull out an NIV and help us all out here. So Ecclesiastes 2, the author says, "I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure to find out what is good." But that also proved to be meaningless. Laughter, I said, is madness, and what does pleasure accomplish? I tried cheering myself with wine and embracing folly. My mind still guided me with wisdom. I wanted to see what was good for people to do under the heavens during the few days of their lives, so I undertook great projects. I built houses for myself, and I planted vineyards. I made gardens and parks and planted all kinds of fruit trees in them. I made reservoirs to water groves of flourishing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had other slaves who were born into my house. I also owned more herds and flocks than anyone in Jerusalem before me. I amassed silver and gold for myself and the treasures of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well, the delights of man's heart. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me, and all this my wisdom stayed with me. And this is really telling. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. So the reason I started out with the 2 truths and a lie is one of the good ways to think about Ecclesiastes 2 is if you just take a minute to look through the list of things. I think it's a pretty telling maybe tale of what our youth looks like. Anybody thinking back to your teenage years, your 20s, your early 30s, and just think about that time of life with me. When I go through some of the key words one more time from Ecclesiastes 2, he says, first I decided I was going to find pleasure in life. I laughed at silly things. Anybody know about the bad jokes in middle school world? I do. They're laughing at nonsense, I tell you people, nonsense. So I try to find pleasure in things in this life. Laughter is silliness. And why is it I'm seeking this pleasure? So then he goes on to say, so then I decided to try out wine. That one probably doesn't need any explanation. And then he says, I went on and I built huge homes for myself and planted beautiful vineyards. Do you kind of see the progression of his life? I'm this silly young boy who's talking about laughter and nonsense and silliness, and then I decide to ramp up my pleasuring desires, so then I go into wine, and we can all imagine what a phase of life might look like for that. And then he says, and then I start building homes, and I plant vineyards, and I'm building the estate, right? I'm building the estate, my house, my home. And then he goes on to say, I bought slaves, both men and women. In our world, maybe a really good analogy of this is I start building a house, I start building my home. I got, 2.3 kids and a house with a white picket fence, and now I'm starting to build my way up the career ladder, right? I bought male and female slaves. So now I don't just work, now I've got employees that work for me. Now I've maybe got extra offices, extra branches. I've spread my territory of whatever my job is. I now have expanded my empire. And then he goes on to say, and I owned large herds and flocks. Okay, this might be the season of life. Okay, I've got the house, and now I'm getting places in my career, and now I've got like investments. I've got a portfolio. I don't just have all this, I have a portfolio of stuff. And now that he's got all of that stuff, he goes, and now I've got silver and gold. Now I've just got like money to have fun with. So we've got this season where he's a silly boy, where he starts drinking, he's building a house, he's got his nice property. Now, you got your nice job, you're doing well, people have a little plaque on your desk in front of you. Now you got investments, you've diversified the portfolio, and you got spending money to buy anything at Walmart you want now, no budget. You can pick out anything you want in those Walmart aisles. My sister once said to me, that's how I'll know I made it in life, when I can walk into a Walmart and buy anything in there. That's going to be my moment. I love her. You got to meet her. And then he goes on to say, so I have silver and gold, and then I hired wonderful singers. What does that seem like? I mean, like the retirement age of life. Okay, I've done well enough for long enough that I've saved up enough that now I don't have to do the grind all day long. I can retire. I can take some time off. I don't have to work as hard anymore. I can go to plays. I can watch movies. I can golf with my friends. I can do all the fun things that I want. So this Ecclesiastes 2 is like telling the very normal progression of human life. And then in 9, he says, I denied myself nothing. I tried everything. I did all the things that you're supposed to do in life. You're supposed to have friends, and you're supposed to, go out and party, and you're supposed to have a house with a white picket fence and 2.3 kids and a dog named Benji, and you're supposed to have a job and a career, and people are supposed to be proud of you, and you retire comfortably. And what does he say? I denied myself no pleasure and even found great pleasure in my hard work. He enjoyed it. He enjoyed building his empire. I found great pleasure in hard work, and that hard work even seemed to be a reward for all my labors. So he's saying, I played by the rules. I did what everybody said I should do to bring myself pleasure. I worked hard. I built a good life for myself. But then he goes on, and this is where it gets really, really telling, is in verse 12. So he says, but then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly. I think the guy's retired, and now he has time to think about, I got more behind me than in front of me, so what was it all worth? And he says, where are we? We're in 14. Okay, thank you. Go to 14. It says, the wise have eyes in their heads while the fools walk in darkness, but I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them all. So if you're wise and if you make good choices, you're going to die. Just like the foolish who squandered everything, made no effort, your fate will be the same. 15 says, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? And I said to myself, this is meaningless. For the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten, and like the fool, the wise too must die. And I think there's that moment, I know even Shane and I have got to this, where we're thinking, okay, we got more years of our career behind us than we do in front of us. And how are we going to remember? You know, what are people going to say about our lives? When I was 20, I had this idea of who I was going to be and what I was going to be. And I still have a few years of my career left in me, and Shane still has a few years of his career left in him.
Really not many.
Not many. More behind than before. But we love you, and you have great hair. But you start asking, like, what was it worth? And did I do what I was supposed to do? And did I live up to any of it? Is it just us? Is that maybe other people too? Like, what was it all? I followed the rules. I tried the things that people told me would bring me contentment and fulfillment. And even many of you, like us, we tried following the church rules. Like, we go to church and we pay our tithes, and yet you're still kind of left wondering. We know in our heads, God says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. But even in a small way, did I make God proud? Will God be proud of me at the end of this? He gave me this life. He entrusted it to me. I still hear my parents' voice. Maybe you guys had these parents. When I was a kid, they would drag me out of bed with this mantra: get out of bed. You need to be a contributing member to society. Be a contributing member to society. I hear that. I'm a grown woman, and like 4 a.m. I wake up thinking, be a contributing member to society. Be a contributing member to society. That voice haunts me. And maybe that's some of you guys too. You finally get to this point where you say, is God proud of me? Is he proud of the work that I've done? Is he proud of the way I have invested the years that he's given me? You look like you have something to say.
Yeah, I think just a couple of thoughts as she's talking. One of them is, do you know how many commercials, advertisements you're exposed to every day? Like 5,000 a day. And all of them have one aim: to tell you what you need in order to be happy, to try to sell you something that you don't need because you believe that it's the key to happiness. And then another thought that I had is Solomon's talking about this going through chapter 2. I've done this. I saw the billboard. I bought the motorcycle. I saw the new edition going up, and I knew I needed a house, and I had all of those things that we think is going to make us happy. You guys have experienced life. Do all the things that the world tells you need to make you happy make you happy? And then he goes on and he's talking about how at the end of his life, how will I be remembered? If you know, they talk about this with presidents a lot. They talk about in politics or the world stage. You guys have lived through history. Did you realize you were living through history when you were living through history? When JFK was shot in what year? Do you remember where you were? Did you know you were experiencing history? When Reagan said, Mr. President, tear down this wall. Did you know in that moment that you were living through history? Did you remember on 9/11 when you were going through the horrific terror of what was happening, that you were living through history. But at some point, we get on the other side of the current events. We look back and remember. But I think one of the most haunting thoughts that any of us can have is, how will I be remembered? What did I do that will last? How many of you know your great-grandparents' names? How many of you know anything about your great-grandparents? How many of you know your great-great-grandparents' names? There's a fellow Ancestry.com guy. I can go back, but here's the thing, I can't hear their voice. I can't understand the decisions they made. I told my dad, Dad, I want to record your life story. And he said, son, I've written it all down. I said, that's not enough. You can't hear a person's voice. You can't see the look in their eyes to see their mannerisms. I want to record you so that your grandkids, when your life here is done, can look back when they have children and say, this is who Papa Hargrave was. This is the kind of life he lived. I want to read, and I know that we're running short of time, and this always happens, especially when you have two teachers who like to talk a lot. Or one, I don't know. So I want to match her use of poetry. So this is one of my favorites. It's from Percy Shelley. I heard this for the first time in college, and this is what this is. This is called the poem is called Ozymandias. Anybody ever heard that before? Okay, she heard of it because I have a picture on my wall when we first started dating. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, 2 vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read which yet survive, stamped on those lifeless things. The hand that mocked them, and the heart that fed, and on the pedestal those words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty in despair. Nothing beside remains round the decay of that colossal wreck. Boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. As Solomon writes, he's asking the question, did my life have meaning? What really mattered that I did or experienced?
So for our concluding illustration, and I wish I had more time, I want you guys to take a minute to close your eyes, if you're okay. Please don't fall asleep on me. Jeremiah 1:5 says this, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And so for our concluding thought tonight, I want you to just take a minute with your eyes closed and think about, as you were being formed in the womb, what thoughts was God thinking over you as he saw your life stretched out inside your mother's body? What visions was he having? What was he seeing? Was he seeing you doing something? Or was he celebrating that you were created and you were his?
John Ortberg writes that God cares less about what you do than he does about who you are. And the beauty of that statement is all of the works of your hands, all the toils that you engage in. My daughter is in 4th grade, and today she was telling Erica, part of her job was to tell Erica about all the inventors and what they invented and what they did. Isn't it hard to imagine that most people rarely ever remember their name or their accomplishments outside of history class? But what lives on is the you inside of you. It's the you that God created. John Ortberg said recently, he said, everyone is for transformation, but very few are for change. How can you become the best you that God has created? If you're married still, if you still have your spouse with you, do you honor them in your speech? Do you honor them in the way you talk to them or treat them? Do you honor the Lord when you go to Dairy Queen and the line is long and the patients are short? And your first job outside of baling hay was at Dairy Queen when blizzards were invented. I'm just making this up as I go. And they do it wrong. And you're like, that's not the way a blizzard's supposed to be made. Totally fabricated. Is the you inside of you going to live on after your name is forgotten? In two ways. For eternity, and secondly, in the way that you influence those around you, that influence those who come after them to a point of greatness, not in accomplishments, but in character. Studies have been done for a long time about generational curses. You know what a generational curse is? Something in Scripture where they talk about a generational curse as being something that someone engaged on and that was visited upon their next generation, that type of sin behavior, anger, pride, arrogance, envy, whatever it is, it continues to trickle to the next generation. Studies have been done on following generational impact that a good person has on those who come behind them, a follower of Jesus on those that come behind them. And what they found is that generational curses don't have to be generational, because you have the power to stop that curse in your own life. And you have the power to pass on hope and start a new trend in your family lineage today. The greatest contribution to this world that you can leave is your legacy of faith.